Emotional regulation is a foundational skill that influences how we manage stress, handle challenges, and connect with others. But what exactly is emotional regulation? Why is it so important for our development and well-being? And most importantly, how can we help our learners strengthen it? Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna. We're behavior analysts who create weekly content about how to teach children with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about emotional regulation. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So think about when you're getting home from work in a bad mood. We kind of have a few options. Not to say we haven't learned from both of these options, but one option is you come home, you're in a bad mood, you take it out on your spouse, your kids, you continue to be in a bad mood, and it affects your relationships, it affects how much you enjoy your evening at home, it affects other people. The other option is that we can have a bad day and notice how we're feeling, that we've had a bad day, we're in a bad mood, we might be frustrated, and engage in some regulation strategies for a few minutes. Take a few minutes before we enter the home, before we're around other people, to be able to deal with the feelings. And that way, we are strengthening our relationships. We're not affecting other people. We're really working, towards our values, which is a lot of what we talk about. And that essentially is emotional regulation. It's not that we don't want anyone to have feelings. As behavior analysts, we do acknowledge that emotions exist. And we want our clients and our students to have the range of emotions. But it's about, are they keeping me from the things that I want to do more of? Or do I need strategies to be able to deal with them in a way that's safe and appropriate? And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Shira, where were you last night when I walked in the door and I forgot to leave my emotions at the door? Just kidding. Emotional regulation, is such a catch-all phrase these days, and you hear so much about it. So, what does it really mean? It really, as we're talking about it, refers to the ability to recognize and understand and manage one's emotions, really in a way that supports appropriate behavior and well-being.
And the message is that it's okay to feel all these emotions, but some of the things that we might do with these emotions are not okay. Now, sometimes it can become a bit of a catch-all. Emotional regulation is not the only approach that we're going to use when we look at a function-based approach to behavior management. We're going to look at prerequisite skills that are function-based, that are direct replacements of that function. So we're still working on teaching FCT and tolerance and attention-seeking behavior, all of the appropriate replacement skills that we're working on. But at the same time, we may also want to help them deal with these big feelings that might be having them, have these over the top emotions or reactions towards certain things.
And I think that's really important to talk about because sometimes, I hear, well, what's the function of behavior? Oh, well, he's really anxious and he can't regulate his emotions. Or, oh, just an emotional regulation thing, he just needs this. And, they could be right, but that's still not the function of the behavior. It could be like a can't do versus won't do, right? Like they don't have those skills to be able to regulate their emotions, but the function still might be, escape related, or the function still might be a communication or lacking of communication. And that's why they can't do it either. So we really need to look at that and go, okay, it's not just emotional regulation. Those emotions absolutely exist, but there's got to be more to that than just emotional regulation.
And emotional regulation is a skill like any other that develops and matures over time. So, the same way we wouldn't expect a 1.5-year-old to be walking completely independently at that age, we expect them to stumble a little bit and we help them along. It's similar with emotional regulation. We know many adults who don't have emotional regulation skills. And so, it's not something that we're expecting our students to have. It's something that we're going to need them to learn, and we can help support them in learning that. And it comes back to, we talk a lot about, which is this psychological flexibility in being able to have this flexibility with life, with the changes, with the things that life sends you, as really a lifelong goal for a lot of our learners.
When I think about emotional regulation, I think about, okay, well, steps to calm down. That's the first thing that comes to my mind is, okay, it's calming strategies. But I've been in therapy sessions where therapists, parents will say, oh, you're anxious right now. Like you've got to get back to calm. Like, great job, you're being calm, or you've got to get back there. And it's not really about that. Like, it's about, it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be angry, but it's really how you act when you're anxious, when you're upset, when you're angry. So using the steps to calm down and reinforcing, yes, you know what, you're using strategies to try and calm yourself, and you're using, you're trying to regulate, but it's not about quote unquote being calm.
Yeah, that's really important. I think that ties into what we reinforce. Also, we can sometimes, whether you're using 3-point scale or colors, reinforce being green or reinforce calm when we really want to focus on reinforcing the use of strategies as opposed to just always being calm. So why would we want to focus on this with a learner then? If we go back to the example given with coming home and getting upset and it ruining your relationships, this comes up with a lot of our learners where it affects their social skills and their ability to manage amongst other peers and in a classroom because small things like losing a game or not getting what they wanted might end in abrupt explosions and other kids might not want to play with them, or that affects their ability to finish a game if they can't win the game, and all of those important skills for socializing.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking about even just learner readiness. So, if someone is, not able to calm themselves and, something is difficult and, they're presented schoolwork or they're presented anything from a learning standpoint and they can't regulate their emotions, it can really affect that as well.
Yeah, life is all about tolerating frustrations and mistakes and changes. And so if our learners don't have those skills, if it's a can't do, then we're going to teach it. It also is important for behavior management. So while we're still, like we said, looking at function-based approaches and replacement skills, we're also teaching them how to be upset, right? It's still a skill. They're allowed to be upset if something doesn't go their way or if something happens in their day, but we have to teach them how to have that behavior. Here's what you can do when you're frustrated that hopefully will be more adaptive than destruction or, something worse.
And that leads to independence as well, right? So if we can, increase emotional regulation skills and increase that, it's almost like a problem solving, right? It's, I'm not going to get frustrated the first time something doesn't go my way. It's really about independence too, right? And being able to be more independent because they're able to regulate their emotions when, they're at home or out in the community.
And it's important to say that we usually don't start with teaching self-regulation because, like I said, many of adults we know don't have self-regulation skills. And so we usually start with our learners with something called co-regulation, where we are serving as the guide and the model in how to regulate, but also they're kind of feeding off of us in our regulation, which is hard because that means we have to be regulated. But that's really how regulation starts, is by having somebody that we can co-regulate off of. And I think that we as adults do that often. You will call a friend when we're going through something hard because they know the right thing to say, or we may want to have time with our spouse after a hard day because we're able to get back to baseline. And so co-regulation is such an important part of this process.
And really, it's about modeling. So, I talk in all of our, programs, we say, okay, well, model first. Even in behavioral skills training, we're talking about, instruction and then model, like constantly modeling those calming strategies. So if someone is having a tough time, taking those deep breaths yourself to really model that calm. Sure, you've got a really good saying. You say, be the thermostat in the room, not the thermometer, really meaning that you're the one who has to be calm so that the thermometer doesn't go up too much, right? Using visuals, check-ins, reinforcement can also help students recognize those feelings, right? So, getting them to talk about it and not while they're frustrated, but, when they're calm, saying, things like, I feel frustrated when my toy's taken away. I'll say things, just in real life, like I feel frustrated when I make a mistake. I feel frustrated when I get something wrong, and really modeling that language so that our learners are able to use that language as well.
And I think the visuals are really important because when we also want to do with regulation is ultimately build up to self-regulation. And if they're relying on somebody to always say, go take a break or try a fidget toy, we're not really empowering them to be able to choose their own strategy. So if we have a visual that even if we're directing them to or guiding or co-regulating, we're still using a visual and teaching them that strategy of choosing something for themselves or referencing the visual, then we're ultimately going to work towards more independence that they could choose their own strategy.
For sure. So you think about some challenges, to teaching emotional regulation. And sometimes, learners are really ready and receptive to learning emotional regulation, and sometimes they're not. So, I'm thinking about, people with limited verbal communication skills. So, a lot of the times when we're teaching emotional regulation, we're talking a lot and saying, hey, this is how you feel. And if someone has a limited verbal capacity, it means that they might understand it still, so you can still continue to do it. But if they don't have that comprehension, we have to think differently. We have to think about how we can teach it instead.
Yeah, and some of our learners do have rigid thinking and really struggle with a lot of this. So we want to take that into account when we're expecting or teaching these emotional regulation skills.
I even think about sensory processing, right? And sensory processing is real, and people feel things differently. And like a scratchy tag might be enough to have a 45-minute tantrum. And again, that's where we're teaching that emotional regulation. But it's about trying to uh, teach that tolerance to some of those sensory things and understanding that people may feel things differently than we do.
So the first thing that we often say when we're teaching emotional regulation is to start teaching when the individual is calm. When they're already heightened or triggered is really not the time to start teaching. We'll eventually transition and generalize into those moments. But the first time that these visuals should come out and we start talking about 3-point scales or emotions shouldn't be when they're already heightened. So start talking about emotions. Like they should be something we're modeling. Like I'm feeling frustrated. I don't know what to do right now, or I'm so disappointed. So teaching using a lot of emotions throughout the day of yourself, of your student, using visuals, helping them really understand that this way we feel has a name.
For students who understand emotions or have at least basic emotional labels, like they're able to say happy or sad or scared, then I start doing something that's called an emotional thermometer, right? So there's different phases of happy. I can be happy or I can be really excited. I can be sad, I can be upset, or I can be really, really, what's another word for sad? I don't know.
Disappointed.
Disappointed, so there's lots of different things. And these can be individualized to learners as well, because, being frustrated for one person might be, the next step after mad, but being frustrated for another learner might be the worst thing ever, right? It's really frustrated is really, really angry. So, having those emotional thermometers and actually having them visual so that kids can see those. And sometimes I'll even put Velcro on them with their pictures and my picture too with a therapist and move it up and down that scale. And, I had one learner in particular we used a emotional thermometer for, and he loved moving his picture back and forth. But what he also loved is having the therapist move her picture back and forth as well, because it was like, oh, wow, other people experience these emotions too, which was pretty cool.
Then you can start practicing some calming techniques, some strategies. These could be individualized to the learner. They could be things that we do just as a group. We'll do a lot of like mindfulness moments or yoga stretches after sitting for a long time. We talk a little bit more about the mindfulness and awareness in episode 187, so go check that out. But really trying to incorporate all of these other like sensory activities, movement breaks, and doing a lot of these again when it's calm, letting them get used to how their body feels, or practice, racing around the room and getting really, excited and getting their heart rate up, and then practicing a strategy. So it's still a little bit contrived, but it's not in the moment of when they've just had a very sensitive trigger.
And the theory behind that is, well, the research behind that is that you really want to make it fluent, right? So if, people can do this fluently and quickly when they're calm, when they're upset, they're more likely to use those strategies. Another technique would be to implement functional communication training. And this probably should have been first, right? Teaching people to communicate, not only saying, I feel blah, 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 but also to request, right? Like, this is what I want. Or, if they have the language to be able to say, I feel disappointed because this happened. I'm really frustrated because I didn't get it right. I don't like when you correct me. So functional communication training is also really that self-advocacy as well.
And then, like we said, using visuals and reinforcement. So having them have a visual with what those strategies could be. And then also using reinforcement for not always being calm, but using those strategies or using whatever they need to do to regulate their communication, their language, asking for a break, whatever that is, reinforce it as much as possible.
And practice, practice, practice. I'm a huge fan of role playing, teaching through play. Sometimes if you have puppets or if you have characters and, the Paw Patrollers come out and, Chase is really upset and Marshall, comes to the rescue, it depersonalizes it a little bit. And the student can take a look at that and go, oh, okay, my favorite characters can do this. Maybe I can as well.
We love the inside out characters for this reason also. We use them often in the visuals and how to act like those characters. And emotional regulation really is a muscle. And like we go to the gym to train our muscles. We would never just try to lift a 200-pound weight without training. This is all about training. It's training our ability to recognize our emotions, helping our students recognize their emotions, and then helping them develop strategies to help them really cope with life.
And really, it's a lifelong skill. So, like Shira said, you don't go to the gym for a week and then be like, okay, I'm done. I've got that in for the year. Or, okay, that's going to save me from a heart attack in 50 years from now. It's something that we have to practice all the time for sure. And that patience and consistency really is key.
And then collaborate, making sure that, they're using it across environments, that we're in touch with parents, with teachers, with other stakeholders, so that our strategies or that what we're teaching our learners are really going to happen in all settings.
So for more information on emotional regulation, click the link in and around this video or in the description to join our next CEU event. It's Teaching Emotional Regulation Strategies to Reduce Anxiety. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future videos, and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.